Welcome back, everybody, to the Vortex vlog. Today we're going to talk a little astrology. Astrology is going to be, and astronomy is going to be a big part of the Vortex Festival. So, as I mentioned in the intro video, Kyla, Alyssa, and I will be hosting an astrology retreat on the 3 days leading up to the festival. So August 5th, 6th, and 7th, we'll be hosting a astrology retreat here in Crestone. And throughout the festival as well, we will be partnering with the Dark Sky community. And the Dark Sky community is really big out here. We are one of the few actual designated dark skies in the country, and it is one of the greatest places for star viewing, for observatory viewing, and we would like to make Crestone and the valley kind of a hub of the learning of the stars and the cosmos. So that's going to be a big part of our festival. Looking at the birth chart of locations is one of my favorite things to do. It really gives me insight as to just kind of the blueprint and the energy of a location and the land itself. So of course, I'm looking at the birth chart of Crestone, which Kyla and I will be doing a talk on during the festival. So for those of you who have always been interested of what is the birth chart, what is the astrological chart of Crestone, come to the festival because it is as interesting as you think it is. Now, what I wanted to talk about today is the birth chart of the San Luis Valley, because part of the vortex itself, right, and the lore and the myth around this area does encompass the valley, right? Because which I will do another video on, talking about the massive amount of UFO or galactic sightings and encounters and paranormal activity and experiences. And a lot of that has happened inside of the valley, right? Specifically in Hooper. And so we also have the sand dunes, which I'll talk about. And so there's so many aspects here to the vortex. So looking at the astrology chart of the valley itself is very illuminating. So for one, it is sometimes hard to get an exact time of incorporation for locations, right? Unless there is a documented incorporation date or something like that, you kind of have to go off of what is the event or the day or the moment in which something is kind of solidified, right? And in the terms of the San Luis Valley, as I shared in my previous video, there's a long history, right? That started with the native and indigenous, going back over 11,000 years, right? They were the first to settle in this valley. They were the first to commune and gather in this valley, live upon the valley, and use it as trade routes and gathering places. Now, in more modern times, right, when the valley was ceded to the U.S. and then became a part of Colorado, that was in 1850. And so in 1851, so the best date that I could get for this was that in 1851, the settlement of San Luis was established. And that we could really look at as the most modern kind of incorporation of the San Luis Valley, right? And so the settlers at that time, in 1851, they held a celebration. And this was actually on the summer solstice of 1851. We just had the summer solstice here yesterday. So on June 21st, 1851, they kind of celebrated or established their settlement by erecting a church. And of course, they dedicated it to San Luis, who was a French king. And they call that day the Feast of San Luis. And so that was their kind of moment to celebrate and kind of dedicate their settlement to San Luis. And so that is the birth date that we're going to use. And in terms of time and rectifying that, I did use 12 p.m. just because that is the height of the day. So that is typically the height of the celebration of the summer solstice, right, is when the sun is highest in the sky, and that kind of marks the moment and the peak of the summer solstice. So I used that time and date, and honestly, it fit perfectly. So using that time and date, this gives the San Luis Valley a Gemini stellium. No surprises there. And specifically the sun at 29 degrees Gemini. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with astrology, when you have a planet that is at the 29th degree, we call that the anaretic degree, or known as a critical degree. There is an intensity to that placement that comes with it. So that is the final degree of a sign. So when you have a planet sitting at an anaretic degree, especially in a birth chart, there is a huge intensity with that placement. There is something very critical that needs to be learned, mastered, integrated, lived out, embodied, right? It takes a really big focus in the chart. So the sun at 29 degrees Gemini. We also have Mercury in Gemini and Venus in Gemini. Now, this makes total sense to me because, of course, one of the things that Gemini rules is information. Gemini is information, connectivity. In many ways, it's storytelling. But Gemini is also the twins, right? And so you can get a lot of duality with Gemini, right? It's both dark and light. It's both the left and right brain. It is quite literally the dual aspects of anything. And I think that sums up the valley here because there is a lot of duality. There is very sometimes dark things that occur, right? And then there's also a ton of light. There can be these kind of mysterious and unexplainable events that have come out of the valley. And that kind of adds to that 29 degrees is that there's a criticalness to information and the stories and the narratives that are coming from the valley, right? And with Mercury in Gemini and Venus in Gemini, that's very much embodied. There's always kind of a lot of he said, she saids that can go on in the valley. There's sometimes also a lot of stories that emerge, right? And that I think comes from this birth chart. Now, the other thing about Gemini is that it is very connected to things like local travel, local market, transportation, right? And we do know that the valley was heavily used as a passageway, right? And as a travel path between locations, right? And so there were trains and there was cargo and there was just a lot of kind of distribution that would go on through the valley. And I think that's very Gemini as well. Now, the interesting part is that all of these Gemini placements actually fall into, the sun specifically falls into the 10th house of the chart, and it's conjunct the midheaven of the San Luis Valley. And the midheaven is often what is most obvious, what is most seen. It can kind of become somewhat of your reputation, how other people see you. It can also be a place in the chart that we look to see what our greatest potential is. And so with the sun conjunct the midheaven here, we can see that the valley became known in modern times mostly for the most wild and bizarre stories coming out of it, right? That is very Gemini. Now, where does the spiritual and the mystic and the kind of paranormal energy come in? Well, using that day and time, we have the moon at 29 degrees Pisces. Now, Pisces is otherworldly. Pisces lies beyond the veil. So, in human nature, we can only perceive about 0.01% of reality. So if you are just using your five senses, you are only perceiving 0.01% of all that exists of reality, right? This is why we're very limited in perception. We can only see this much of the light spectrum. We can only perceive this much of energy because we're basically working off only what is tangible. Okay, so Pisces kind of represents the other 99.99% of reality that is not perceivable through the five senses. This is why Pisces is often associated with things that are paranormal, beyond the veil, things that are deeply intuitive and mystical and spiritual, is because they have to be sensed. They have to be perceived through extrasensory perceptions and not through the five senses, right? So with the moon at 29 degrees Gemini, the vibe is mystical. The vibe is unexplainable. You can get some wonky shit that happens, especially at the 29th degree of Pisces. Now, this would mean that the moon at 29 degrees Pisces is in an exact square to the sun at 29 degrees Gemini. And when you have a square in the chart, it creates tension. There's a bit of a conflict going on. And so again, I kind of see this perfectly play out is, with Pisces and Gemini, there can be these conflicts of clarity. The information's confusing. The stories don't add up, right? And all the research that I was doing to put together this vlog, of all the kind of different paranormal activities and experiences and the different myths and legends that come from this valley, one thing that you will see commonly is that a lot of things are unexplainable here. They just can't nail it down. There's this sense of we don't have the full picture. There's not clarity. There's a lot of theories. There's a lot of anomalies. There's a lot of things that we can't quite understand. And I think that goes to the moon and the sun in this square at the 29th degrees of both Gemini and Pisces. And this is where we say that the energy here and the vortex has to be experienced. It really can't be understood with the mind. It can't fully be explained. But it also made me really think about, locals here will tell you that a lot of the local lore is that the vortex here will call you in or it will push you out. That the vortex itself kind of acts as like this sentient being, right? And there are times where a lot of people are called here, and then they leave and then they get called back. And it's very much that vortex is a two-way street. And I think that really explains it to me as well, is that there are times where in order to come into this intensity of energy, and it's very much a whirlwind of both spiritual energy, mystical energy, paranormal energy, but also this very raw, real energy, right? And you have to be able to work inside that whirlwind. And that kind of goes to why the vortex is the way that it is. It pulls you in and it pushes you out. And so maybe this place is also somewhat of a passageway, right? We know it was a physical passageway for distribution and travel, but maybe it's also some sort of mystical passageway, some sort of mystical highway, if you will, where you're passing between worlds in the valley. And that would explain a lot of things, right? Now, the other thing that I found really interesting here, so we also have Neptune in Pisces in this chart in retrograde. And this makes sense to me as well. We also have Chiron in Sagittarius in the chart. And so 9 degrees of Pisces, 9 degrees is a Sagittarius degree. And so Sagittarius has a lot to do with our beliefs, how we see the world, how we live inside of it, right? It's how we gain wisdom through experience. And so in modern astrology, Sagittarius can very much rule various belief systems, religions, spiritual practices, right? Which makes sense as to why this valley became a hub for spirituality and religious centers. Dabaka has more spiritual centers per capita than anywhere else in the world. And so again, this kind of, you can tell by the blueprint of the land, it was indeed supposed to be, it's almost like it's a voyage. It's a spiritual quest. It's a portal. It's a vortex. It is quite literally an experience that can transport you into various worlds. It can swirl you around and spit you out, but either way, you're going to be a different person as you come in than when you go out, right? And so finally, I wanted to touch on the Taurus stellium that also exists in the valley. So Saturn in Taurus, Uranus in Taurus, and Pluto in Taurus. And they're all conjunct. Okay, so that's a really interesting setup there. But Taurus is the land. Taurus is the physical, tangible reality that we operate in every day, right? It's the body. It's the sense of rootedness, groundedness. It's our connection to the physical, external, tangible world. And this is why Taurus then often will be associated with things like money and resources and prosperity and abundance, because that is the earth. The earth represents those things. She provides the resources. She provides the abundance and prosperity. And so to live in the natural rhythms and cycles of the earth is what Taurus calls for us to do. It's to have an attunement to spirit that lives right in all living things. It's to be in tune with the sacredness of life. And so to have these three, and Saturn, is a bit of a tough love teacher. Uranus can, of course, kind of disrupt what we cling to, what we attach to, and Pluto provides deep transformation. And having all of that in Taurus here in this chart, and it also falls in the 8th house. We also have Mars in Taurus. Sorry, I missed that. Mars in Taurus as well. And all of those fall into the 8th house of this chart. The 8th house is the esoteric. It is the house of the unseen, the unspoken. It is what is hidden. Right? There can be layers and layers of things that we have to unravel in the 8th house to really discover our power. The 8th house is deeply healing, but it's also deeply painful. And so the 8th house is a deep house to work within in any chart. But here it tells me that a lot of things that are unseen and hidden and maybe even painful lie in the land, right? Lie in the bodies. It lies in the real life, tangible experience here. And so it made me think about a lot of things, where there has been tragedies in the valley. There has been maybe lots of history that we actually don't even know about. But the land remembers it. And I think that getting in tune with the land here, and this is what the native and indigenous did do, it holds a lot of power, and it holds a lot of the secrets and the wisdoms, right? But it has to be uncovered. And that is deeply felt in the valley. I also think it leads to the experience of the intensity of the energy here. Obviously, with all these planets in Taurus, it's telling us that the intensity lives in the land, in the mountains, in the trees, in the rivers, right? It exudes it. Again, very vortex-like behavior. And so one of the things that I was thinking as I was looking into that, and also because this chart has Jupiter in Libra in the 1st house. Libra is the peacekeeper. Libra is the one who wants harmony and balance. And the 1st house is the house of identity. So the bloodless valley very much came from Jupiter and Libra here in the 1st house. It exudes beauty, right? The 1st house is how we express ourselves. It's our sense of who we are and how we show up in the world. And so this valley exudes beauty. It exudes harmony. It exudes this nature of wanting to be in balance with all things. And so it makes total sense why it was called the Bloodless Valley, why no one wanted to fight or shed blood or have conflict here, because it would be totally out of harmony with the blueprint of the land. Now, what is interesting is that right now there's a lot of activity in this chart through transits in the sky. So we have Uranus and Gemini. Uranus officially moved into Gemini at the end of April of this year. It will be there for over 7 years. So Uranus is going to start conjuncting all of the Gemini placements here in the chart. It's going to first hit Venus, which it's already conjunct Venus. It will then hit the Mercury. And of course, much later in the transit, it will hit our sun at 29 degrees. So right now, Uranus in Gemini is transiting our ninth house, and our ninth house is the house of Sagittarius. It's shaking up maybe what we believe to be true. Maybe there's new stories to emerge. Maybe there is new information and wisdom to share. The ninth house can also have kind of a global effect, a global implication. Maybe the San Luis Valley will become, a great hub, a just for people to appreciate what this place has to offer. It has so much to teach. It has so much to share. And maybe that will start to come through. And of course, we also have Chiron and Taurus. Chiron and Taurus just started a few days ago. It's a brief transit here until September, and then Chiron will go back and retrograde into Aries until April of next year. But come April of next year, Chiron will officially be in Taurus for at least 7 to 8 years. So currently in this short, brief window, and Chiron will be in Taurus during our festival, Chiron is already conjuncting our Pluto at 0 degrees Taurus, as well as our Saturn at 1 degree Taurus. And so, Chiron and Taurus, I think in many ways is asking us to open up to healing what lies in the body, to healing what lies in our tangible and physical realities, right? Like we have to heal. And I do think that this transit is going to bring up so much conversation about how we are going to reconnect with the earth and with nature, how we are going to restore our relationship with her, and themes around sustainability, right? And of course, if anyone's ever traveled to the valley or to Crestone, you will know that we have a huge community who's really passionate about sustainable living, about sustainable growing, and local economy. And I think that this Chiron brief transit here is going to really be igniting that here in the valley. We already have some great initiatives going. Just to name a few, Jay Sanders, she's been putting together Meet the Market events, which is basically getting all the local farmers and growers together with businesses to establish relationships, so that we can, to the best of our ability, get all of our produce and food through the network of local growers, right? Really farm to table type of connections here, so that we can not only provide the best quality food to the community, but that we have a sustainable operation, right? Where we know our local farmers, we know who's growing our food, right? And I think that's going to become a huge boom here in the valley. This community is very, very passionate about that. And I think in the world that we live in, we need to become sustainable and kind of take back our power and our resources from these big corporations and from eating food that we have no idea what's in it. It's grown and distributed by people who have no connection to the land, no connection to the food itself. And so I do believe that this valley has the opportunity to truly become a leader in that way. We also have the San Luis Valley Regenerative Network. That's led by Michael Agape. And that is getting together networks of growers, so that everybody can have some sort of network and communication on who's growing what, who needs assistance with growing, how we can best distribute what we grow to the local community. So those are just some initiatives that the community is doing. And of course, as I mentioned last time, the energy fair that is held every September here, and they do amazing workshops and talks and kind of community groups on sustainable building, eco-friendly building, right? And this is all leading us to, and I think looking at this chart, it is imperative, and that it really explains why this is such a magical, unique place. Not only because the land is so magical and so powerful, but because everybody who's called here understands that and recognizes the sacredness of it. And I really do think the San Luis Valley and Crestone will become huge leaders in sustainable living, in bringing back the sacredness of living with the earth, of honoring nature, of having a symbiosis, and, you know, sustainable growing, sustainable building, sustainable communities. So that's just some interesting astrology of the San Luis Valley. And as I mentioned, Kyle and I will be doing a specific talk on the astrology chart of Crestone itself during the festival. And that is really interesting as well, just because, of course, Crestone has so much of its own unique personality here, and really kind of gives us another layer of insight as to the vortex here. So thank you guys for watching. And of course, for those of you who are interested in vending at the festival, please do check out our website, darkskyvortex.com. And if anybody has any questions about vending, visiting, attending, you can send us an email at darkskyvortex@gmail.com.